I came home from work on a sweltering Tuesday afternoon in Gilbert, Arizona, to find my front lawn flooding like someone had opened a fire hydrant. Water was gushing everywhere, pooling across the driveway, streaming into the street, and turning my carefully maintained desert landscaping into a muddy disaster zone. My first thought was that a pipe had burst underground, but as I got closer, I could see the mangled remains of my sprinkler system's main control valve sticking up from the ground like broken bones. My name is Marcus Webb, and I had lived in the Saguaro Heights subdivision for 3 years without any major problems. The neighborhood was nice, the people were mostly friendly, and I had worked hard to make my property look good despite Arizona's brutal summer heat. I had installed a state-of-the-art irrigation system the previous year because water conservation was important to me, and the programmable smart system let me water efficiently during the coolest parts of the day. It had cost me nearly $4,000 to have professionally installed, and now it was destroyed. I rushed to the main water shutoff valve on the side of my house and cranked it closed, stopping the flood. My work shoes were soaked, my khaki pants were splattered with mud, and I was trying to figure out what the hell had happened when I noticed my neighbor, Tom Hendricks, standing in his driveway with his arms crossed and a strange expression on his face. "You see what happened here?" I called out to him, gesturing at the wreckage. Tom walked over, shaking his head. "Man, you are not going to believe this. I saw the whole thing about an hour ago." "What do you mean? What happened?" He glanced around as if checking to see if anyone was listening, then lowered his voice. "Brenda Patterson happened, the HOA president. She came by with some guy in a pickup truck, and they went straight to your sprinkler controls. I thought maybe you had hired them for maintenance or something, but then I saw her pointing and giving directions, and the guy started digging with a shovel." I felt my jaw clench. Brenda Patterson was the epitome of every HOA horror story you read about online. She was a 52-year-old woman with short blonde hair that she kept in that classic "can I speak to the manager" style, always wore pastel pantsuits, and drove a white Lexus SUV with a vanity plate that read Hoken. She had made my life difficult from the moment I moved in, sending violation notices for the most ridiculous things. My trash can was visible from the street for 20 minutes after trash pickup. My house number needed to be exactly 4 inches tall, not the 3.9 inches that my numbers apparently measured. My front door wreath during Christmas was not an approved color scheme. "Why would she dig up my sprinkler system?" I asked, though I had a sinking feeling I knew the answer. Tom shrugged. "I heard her saying something about unauthorized irrigation modifications and code violations. She said something about taking matters into her own hands since you had ignored multiple warnings." The guy with her looked uncomfortable, but he did what she told him. "They were here maybe 20 minutes, and when they left, your system was torn up and water was everywhere." I pulled out my phone and immediately started taking pictures of the damage. The main valve was completely destroyed, several pipes were cracked and broken, and the control box had been ripped open with wires hanging out. This was not a simple repair. This was extensive damage that would require a professional irrigation company to fix. "Did you get any video?" I asked Tom hopefully. "Better than that," he said with a slight smile. "My doorbell camera has a clear view of your front yard. It records everything. I already checked and it captured the whole thing." I could have hugged him right there. "Tom, you might have just saved me thousands of dollars. Can you send me that footage?" "Already downloaded it. Give me your email and I will send it over right now." I gave him my information, and within 5 minutes, I had the video file on my phone. I watched it twice, and my anger grew with each viewing. The footage was crystal clear, time-stamped, and showed everything. Brenda Patterson's Lexus pulled up at 2:47 p.m. She got out wearing a pink pantsuit and sunglasses, spoke to a Hispanic man in a gray pickup truck who pulled up behind her, and then pointed at my sprinkler system. The man retrieved a shovel and a crowbar from his truck, and under Brenda's direction, he proceeded to dig up and destroy my irrigation system's main components. You could see Brenda standing there with her arms crossed, nodding in approval as he worked. When water started shooting everywhere, they both quickly got in their vehicles and drove away, leaving my property flooding. This was not an accident. This was not a mistake. This was deliberate destruction of my property, and I had video proof. I called my insurance company first, but they told me that since this was intentional damage caused by a third party, I would need to file a police report and potentially pursue the costs through small claims court. They could not cover vandalism under my homeowner's policy without a police report and an investigation. So I called the Gilbert Police Department non-emergency line and explained the situation. They sent an officer out within an hour, a young guy named Officer Martinez, who looked like he had just graduated from the academy. He took my statement, watched the video footage on my phone, examined the damage, and wrote up a detailed report. "This is pretty cut and dry," Officer Martinez said as he took photos of the destruction. "You have clear video evidence of two individuals intentionally damaging your property. The woman you identified as Brenda Patterson and an unknown male subject. Do you know who the man is?" "No idea, never seen him before. We will need to follow up with Miss Patterson and identify the other subject. This is criminal damage to property, which in Arizona, given the cost of repairs will likely exceed $1,000, could be a Class 5 felony." I blinked. "A felony? Really?" Officer Martinez nodded. "If the damage is valued between $1,000 and $10,000, yes, it is a felony in Arizona. You should get repair estimates as soon as possible. In the meantime, I am going to have a talk with Miss Patterson." He left, and I immediately called 3 different irrigation repair companies to come out and give me estimates. The first company, Desert Irrigation Solutions, sent someone out that same evening. The technician, a middle-aged guy named Carlos, surveyed the damage with a long whistle. "Whoever did this knew what they were doing," Carlos said, kneeling beside the destroyed valve system. "They did not just accidentally damage this. They went straight for the most expensive components. Your main valve assembly is completely destroyed. You have got cracked pipes here and here. Your control box is trashed, and they damaged the wiring underground. Plus, we are going to need to regrade this whole section because of the flooding and erosion. How much are we talking?" Carlos did some calculations on his tablet, measuring and taking notes. After about 20 minutes, he handed me a printed estimate. "Total repair cost is going to be $1,340. That includes parts, labor, and restoration of the landscape. I can have a crew out here Friday to start the work." I took the estimate and thanked him. The next morning, I got 2 more estimates from other companies. One came in at $1,420 and the other at $1,295. All 3 were in the same ballpark, confirming that this was not a cheap fix. I decided to go with Desert Irrigation Solutions since they could start the soonest, and I signed the contract. They required 50% down, so I paid $670 on my credit card, money I had not planned on spending. That afternoon, I received a formal letter in my mailbox from the HOA. It was on official Saguaro Heights HOA letterhead, and it was signed by Brenda Patterson in her capacity as president. The letter stated that I had been in violation of Section 7.3 of the HOA covenants, conditions, and restrictions, which required all exterior modifications to be approved by the Architectural Review Committee prior to installation. According to the letter, my irrigation system modifications had never been approved, and the HOA had exercised its right under Section 12.8 to remedy violations at the homeowner's expense after multiple written warnings had been ignored. I read the letter 3 times, my blood pressure rising with each pass. First of all, I had never modified my irrigation system beyond the original installation, which I had gotten approval for 3 years ago. I had the approval letter in my files. Second, I had never received multiple warnings about any violation related to my sprinklers. The only violation notices I had ever received from Brenda were for petty nonsense that I had always corrected immediately. Third, even if there had been a legitimate violation, the HOA did not have the right to come onto my property and destroy my equipment without notice, without my consent, and without following proper legal procedures. This letter was Brenda trying to cover her ass after the fact, and it made me even angrier. I scanned all my documents, including the original irrigation approval from 3 years ago, the video footage, the police report, the repair estimates, and Brenda's letter. Then I drafted a formal demand letter. I had a lawyer friend, Steve Chen, who practiced real estate law, and I called him for advice. "Marcus, this is nuts," Steve said after I explained everything and sent him the documentation. "She cannot just destroy your property like that. Even if there was a violation, which it does not look like there was, the HOA has to follow proper procedures. They have to give you written notice, a chance to cure, and then go through the courts if you do not comply. They cannot take vigilante action. So what do I do? Send her a demand letter for the full cost of repairs, plus your costs for dealing with this situation. Give her 10 days to pay. If she does not, file in small claims court. With the video evidence you have, this should be straightforward. I will draft the demand letter for you, no charge. We have been friends too long for me to bill you for this." Steve sent me the demand letter the next day, and I had it delivered to Brenda Patterson via certified mail, return receipt requested. The letter was professional but firm. It detailed the incident, included timestamps and descriptions of the video evidence, cited the lack of any legitimate violation, explained that her actions constituted criminal damage to property and trespass, and demanded payment of $1,340 for repairs within 10 business days. It also noted that failure to pay would result in litigation and potentially additional damages and attorney's fees. I got the return receipt 3 days later, confirming that Brenda had received and signed for the letter. Then I waited. During those 10 days, the irrigation company completed the repairs. My lawn slowly recovered from the flooding, and my sprinkler system was back to working perfectly. I paid the remaining balance of $670 when the work was finished, bringing my total out-of-pocket cost to exactly $1,340, not counting my time, stress, and aggravation. On day 8, I received a response from Brenda Patterson. It was not an apology or a check. It was a letter from her attorney, a guy named Richard Klemp from a local firm that apparently specialized in HOA law. The letter was condescending and dismissive. It claimed that the HOA had acted within its authority under the governing documents, that I had been properly noticed of violations, that my irrigation system had never been approved, and that I was actually in debt to the HOA for the cost of their remediation efforts. The letter demanded that I pay the HOA $350 for the labor and equipment costs they had incurred in removing my unauthorized irrigation equipment. I could not believe what I was reading. They were actually trying to make me pay them for destroying my property. I forwarded the letter to Steve, who called me within an hour, laughing in disbelief. "This is the most ridiculous thing I have ever read," Steve said. "This attorney is either completely incompetent or he is hoping you will just give up. You have video evidence, Marcus." Clear, time-stamped video of his client committing property destruction. And now they are claiming you owe them money. File in small claims court tomorrow. I will help you with the paperwork. The next day, I went to the Gilbert Justice Court and filed a small claims complaint against Brenda Patterson. In Arizona, small claims court handles disputes up to $3,500, so my $1,340 claim was well within the limits. The filing fee was $63, which I paid and included in my total damages. The court assigned a hearing date 6 weeks out, and Brenda was served with the complaint by a process server. I knew she received it because 2 days later, I got an angry phone call from Richard Klemp, her attorney. "Mr. Webb, this is Richard Klemp representing Miss Patterson and the Saguaro Heights HOA. I am calling to inform you that your lawsuit is frivolous and without merit. You are wasting the court's time and your own money. Mr. Klemp, I have video evidence of your client destroying my property. I have repair bills. I have a police report. How is that frivolous? Miss Patterson was acting in her official capacity as HOA president to enforce the community's governing documents. She is protected by the business judgment rule and has immunity for actions taken in good faith to enforce HOA rules. She destroyed my property without notice, without a hearing, and without any legal authority. That is not good faith. That is vandalism. And I had approval for my irrigation system, which I can prove. We will see what the judge says, Mr. Webb. I strongly suggest you dismiss this lawsuit and pay the HOA's outstanding invoice, or we will be forced to file a counterclaim for our attorney's fees and costs. You do what you need to do, Mr. Klemp. I will see you in court." I hung up, my hands shaking with anger and adrenaline. Steve had warned me that HOA attorneys often tried to bully homeowners into backing down, especially in small claims cases where the amounts were not huge. But I was not backing down. This was about principle as much as money. The weeks leading up to the court date were tense. I received 2 more letters from Richard Klemp, each one more threatening than the last. He claimed that if I did not dismiss my lawsuit, they would countersue me for violating HOA rules, for harassment, for defamation, and for their legal fees. He threw around terms like vexatious litigant and malicious prosecution in what I assumed was an attempt to scare me. Steve reviewed each letter and assured me they were mostly bluster. "He is trying to intimidate you. It is a common tactic, but you have the evidence. Just stay calm and stick to the facts." I also started receiving passive-aggressive emails from Brenda Patterson about various alleged HOA violations. My mailbox was 1 inch too far to the right. My garage door was left open for 45 minutes on a Saturday morning, which violated the community's aesthetic standards. My car was parked on the street overnight, which was technically prohibited without a permit. Each email was petty and vindictive, clearly designed to harass me for daring to sue her. I documented every email, every letter, and every interaction. I created a binder with tabs for each category of evidence: the original irrigation approval, the violation notices I had received over the years, which notably did not mention anything about unauthorized irrigation, the video footage with screenshots, the police report, all 3 repair estimates, the paid invoices, the demand letter, Brenda's response and the letters from her attorney, and the harassment communications I had received since filing the lawsuit. I also subpoenaed the HOA's records related to my property, including all Architectural Review Committee meetings and decisions, all board meeting minutes that mentioned my address, and all violation notices sent to me. Under Arizona law, HOA members have the right to inspect HOA records, and the court's subpoena power made it even easier to get everything I needed. What I discovered in those records was eye-opening. There was no record of any Architectural Review Committee meeting or decision regarding my irrigation system beyond the original approval from 3 years ago. There was no record of any board discussion about irrigation violations at my property. There were no copies of any violation notices related to irrigation in the HOA's files, even though Brenda had claimed in her letter that multiple warnings had been sent. What I did find were several emails between Brenda and other board members, where she complained about me personally. In one email from 2 months before the incident, she wrote to the board treasurer, "Marcus Webb thinks he can do whatever he wants without following the rules. His irrigation system is way too elaborate for this neighborhood, and it makes everyone else's yards look bad. We need to do something about it." In another email, she wrote to the board's secretary, "I am tired of homeowners like Webb who think they are above the HOA. If the board will not take action, I will handle it myself." That email was dated 1 week before she destroyed my sprinkler system. I added all of this to my evidence binder. The court date finally arrived on a Thursday morning in late September. The hearing was scheduled for 9:30 a.m. at the Gilbert Justice Court. I arrived at 9, wearing a suit and carrying my binder of evidence. Steve had offered to come with me for moral support, but I told him I could handle it. Small claims court in Arizona does not allow attorneys to represent parties anyway, so everyone has to speak for themselves. I checked in with the court clerk and took a seat in the courtroom. It was a small room with about 30 chairs for observers, a judge's bench at the front, and 2 tables facing the judge for the parties. Several other cases were scheduled that morning, so I waited for my case to be called. Brenda Patterson arrived at 9:25, accompanied by Richard Klemp. She was wearing a lavender pantsuit and looked confident, almost smug. Klemp was a short, balding man in his 50s with a briefcase that looked more expensive than my car. They sat on the opposite side of the room and did not acknowledge me. At 9:45, the bailiff called my case. Webb versus Patterson, case number CV 2024-008847. I walked to the plaintiff's table and Brenda walked to the defendant's table. Richard Klemp tried to follow her, but the judge, a woman in her 60s with gray hair and reading glasses, stopped him. "Counsel, this is small claims court. Parties represent themselves. You may observe from the gallery, but you may not participate." Klemp looked annoyed but nodded and took a seat in the front row. "Mr. Webb, this is your case," the judge said, looking at me over her glasses. "Please present your claim." I took a deep breath and began. "Your Honor, my name is Marcus Webb, and I am suing Brenda Patterson for $1,340 in damages, plus $63 in court filing fees, for a total of $1,403. On August 13th of this year, Miss Patterson came to my property with another individual and intentionally destroyed my irrigation system. I have video evidence of the incident, repair bills, and documentation showing that Miss Patterson had no legal authority to take this action. I handed the judge a copy of my evidence binder, which I had prepared with an index and tabs for easy reference. Your Honor, I have organized all the evidence by category. Tab 1 contains the video footage on a USB drive, along with screenshots showing Miss Patterson and the other individual destroying my property. Tab 2 contains the police report filed after the incident. Tab 3 contains 3 independent repair estimates, all in the same range, and the paid invoice showing I paid $1,340 for repairs. Tab 4 contains my original approval from the HOA for the irrigation system installation 3 years ago. Tab 5 contains all the violation notices I have ever received from the HOA, none of which mention any issue with my irrigation system. Tab 6 contains the demand letter I sent to Miss Patterson and her response, and Tab 7 contains evidence of retaliatory actions taken against me since I filed this lawsuit. The judge took the binder and began reviewing it while I stood quietly. She spent several minutes looking through the tabs, paying particular attention to the video screenshots. Then she looked up at Brenda. "Miss Patterson, I am looking at video evidence that appears to show you directing someone to destroy the plaintiff's property. What is your response?" Brenda stood up, and I could see her confidence wavering slightly. "Your Honor, I am the president of the Saguaro Heights Homeowners Association, and I was acting in my official capacity to enforce our community's rules. Mr. Webb installed an unauthorized irrigation system that violated our governing documents. After he ignored multiple warnings, I exercised the HOA's right to remedy the violation." "Do you have copies of these multiple warnings you claim to have sent?" Brenda hesitated. "They should be in the HOA's files, Your Honor. I don't have them with me today." Mr. Webb has provided evidence showing he received approval for his irrigation system 3 years ago. Do you have any documentation showing that this approval was revoked or that there was a subsequent violation? The approval was for a basic system, Your Honor. Mr. Webb expanded the system beyond what was approved without seeking additional permission. Do you have any evidence of this expansion? Any photos, any inspection reports, any correspondence with Mr. Webb about this issue? Brenda shifted uncomfortably. The violation was obvious, Your Honor. The system was much more elaborate than what a typical home would have. The judge removed her glasses and fixed Brenda with a stern look. Miss Patterson, you do not get to unilaterally decide that someone's property is in violation and then destroy it without following proper procedures. Even if there was a violation, which the evidence before me does not support, you are required to provide written notice, allow an opportunity to cure, conduct a hearing if requested, and ultimately go through the court system if the homeowner does not comply. You cannot take matters into your own hands and commit what amounts to vandalism. Your Honor, I was trying to protect the community's interests. By breaking the law, the judge's voice was sharp. Miss Patterson, I have watched the video. You directed someone to dig up and destroy Mr. Webb's irrigation system. Water was flooding everywhere, causing additional damage to his property. This was not a reasonable action taken in good faith. This was property destruction, pure and simple. She turned to me. Mr. Webb, do you have any additional comments? Just that I tried to resolve this matter outside of court, Your Honor. I sent Miss Patterson a demand letter giving her 10 days to pay for the repairs. Instead, she had her attorney send me threatening letters and tried to make me pay her for destroying my property. I have been harassed with frivolous violation notices ever since I filed this lawsuit. I just want to be compensated for the damage she caused and to be left alone. The judge nodded and made some notes. Then she looked at both of us. Here is my ruling. Based on the clear video evidence, the repair estimates and invoices, and the lack of any credible defense, I find in favor of the plaintiff, Marcus Webb. Miss Patterson, you are ordered to pay Mr. Webb $1,340 for the irrigation repairs, plus $63 in court filing fees, for a total of $1,403. Payment is due within 30 days. If you fail to pay within 30 days, Mr. Webb may pursue collection remedies, including garnishment of wages or bank accounts. The judge paused and looked directly at Brenda. Miss Patterson, I am also going to say something off the record, though it will be in the court transcript. Your actions were not only illegal, but incredibly poor judgment for someone in a leadership position. Homeowners associations exist to maintain property values and community standards, not to bully residents or destroy their property. I strongly suggest you reconsider your approach to HOA governance, or you may find yourself facing more lawsuits and potentially criminal charges. The police report that Mr. Webb filed is still an open matter, and the prosecutor's office may decide to pursue criminal charges for property damage. Do you understand? Brenda's face had gone pale. Yes, Your Honor. Good. This case is concluded. The clerk will provide Mr. Webb with a certified copy of the judgment. The bailiff called the next case, and I gathered my evidence binder and walked out of the courtroom. I felt like a massive weight had been lifted off my shoulders. I had won. Not only had I won, but the judge had completely validated my position and called out Brenda's behavior in open court. Richard Klemp caught up with me in the hallway outside the courtroom. Mr. Webb, congratulations on your victory. I want you to know that I advised my client against her course of action, but she chose not to listen. I will make sure she pays the judgment within the 30-day deadline. I looked at him skeptically. You sent me some pretty threatening letters, Mr. Klemp. Were those also against your advice? He had the decency to look slightly embarrassed. I represented my client's position as I was obligated to do. But between you and me, this was not a case I would have chosen to defend if I had known all the facts up front. Miss Patterson was not entirely forthcoming with me about the video evidence or the lack of documentation for her claims. Right. Well, I will expect payment within 30 days as the judge ordered. If not, I will be pursuing collection and I will add those costs to the total as well. Understood. Again, congratulations. He walked away and I left the courthouse feeling victorious. Steve called me an hour later and I told him everything that had happened. That is awesome, Marcus. You did everything right. And what the judge said about potential criminal charges is interesting. Have you heard anything from the police about that? Not since the initial report. Officer Martinez said they would follow up, but I have not heard anything. You might want to call the detective division and check on the status. If they have not already, they should be interviewing Brenda Patterson about the incident. With the judge's comments on the record, it might give the prosecutor's office more incentive to file charges. I called the Gilbert Police Department that afternoon and asked to speak with someone about my case. They transferred me to Detective Sarah Wu, who was handling property crime cases. I explained the situation and gave her the case number from Officer Martinez's original report. Oh yes, I remember this case, Detective Wu said. I actually interviewed Miss Patterson 2 weeks ago. She admitted to hiring someone to remove your irrigation equipment, but claimed she had the authority to do so as HOA president. I also interviewed the man who did the physical work, a handyman named Miguel Ortiz. He said Miss Patterson paid him $150 cash to dig up and remove your sprinkler system. He thought it was legitimate HOA business and did not realize he was destroying your property. So what happens now? I submitted my report to the county attorney's office last week with a recommendation for charges. Given the amount of damage and the fact that Miss Patterson clearly acted intentionally, I recommended a Class 5 felony charge for criminal damage. The prosecutor will make the final decision on whether to file charges. That usually takes a few weeks. The judge in my civil case today mentioned that criminal charges might be coming. She seemed pretty upset about what Brenda did. Good. That might help our case. Sometimes civil judgments make it easier for prosecutors to pursue criminal charges because the facts have already been established in court. I will follow up with the county attorney's office and mention your civil judgment. Can you send me a copy of the court's ruling when you get it? Absolutely. I will email it to you as soon as I get the certified copy from the clerk. 3 weeks later, 2 things happened on the same day. First, I received a cashier's check in the mail from Richard Klemp's law firm in the amount of $1,403, paying the judgment in full. There was no letter, no apology, just the check. I deposited it immediately. Second, I received a call from Detective Wu informing me that the Maricopa County Attorney's Office had filed criminal charges against Brenda Patterson. She was charged with 1 count of criminal damage, a Class 5 felony, because the damage exceeded $1,000. There was a warrant issued for her arrest, but she would have the option to turn herself in voluntarily rather than being arrested at home or work. What does this mean for her? I asked. If convicted, she could face probation, community service, restitution, which she has already paid you, and a possible prison sentence of up to 2 years, though that is unlikely for a first-time offender. More realistically, if she pleads guilty or is found guilty, she will probably get probation, a fine, and community service. But she will have a felony conviction on her record, which is significant. And what do I need to do? You will probably be called as a witness if the case goes to trial, but most of these cases end in plea agreements. I will keep you updated on what happens. 2 days later, the local news picked up the story. A reporter from the Arizona Republic had been monitoring court records and came across the criminal charges filed against an HOA president for destroying a homeowner's property. They contacted me, and after talking with Steve about whether I should comment, I agreed to a brief interview. The article ran online and in print, with the headline HOA President charged with felony after destroying homeowner's sprinkler system. It included details of the case, quotes from me about the incident, and a mugshot of Brenda Patterson from when she had turned herself in to be booked. The story got picked up by several other local news outlets and even made it onto a few national HOA horror story websites. The publicity had an interesting effect on the Saguaro Heights HOA. Within a week, I received a letter signed by 3 other board members, not including Brenda, informing the community that Brenda Patterson had resigned as president effective immediately. The letter stated that the board was conducting a comprehensive review of HOA policies and procedures to ensure compliance with Arizona law and to prevent future incidents. They also announced that they were retaining new legal counsel and that any homeowners who had concerns about previous HOA actions should contact the new board president to discuss them. I later learned from Tom Hendricks, who was more plugged into neighborhood gossip than I was, that several other homeowners had come forward with complaints about Brenda's behavior during her time as HOA president. Apparently, I was not the only one who had been harassed with frivolous violation notices and threats. There was talk of a class action lawsuit against the HOA for Brenda's actions, though I did not know if anything would come of it. The criminal case moved slowly through the system. Brenda Patterson hired a criminal defense attorney, and there were several pre-trial hearings that I did not have to attend. Detective Wu kept me informed of the major developments. 4 months after the charges were filed, Detective Wu called me with news. Brenda Patterson has agreed to a plea deal. She is pleading guilty to a reduced charge of Class 1 misdemeanor criminal damage. The prosecutor agreed to the reduction because she paid full restitution. She has no prior criminal record, and she resigned from the HOA board. The sentencing hearing is next month. So no felony conviction. No, it will be a misdemeanor, but she will still have a criminal record and the judge can impose probation, fines, and community service. The prosecutor is recommending 1 year of supervised probation, a fine of $1,000, 100 hours of community service, and mandatory anger management counseling. That seems fair, I guess. At least she is being held accountable. Definitely. And with a criminal conviction, even a misdemeanor, she will have a hard time serving on any HOA board in the future. Most HOA governing documents prohibit board members with criminal convictions. I attended the sentencing hearing out of curiosity. The courtroom was more crowded than I expected, with several people I recognized from my neighborhood in attendance. Brenda Patterson stood before the judge with her attorney and formally pleaded guilty, to misdemeanor criminal damage. The judge accepted the plea and imposed the sentence recommended by the prosecutor. 1 year supervised probation, a $1,000 fine, 100 hours of community service, and completion of an anger management program. Before imposing the sentence, the judge allowed me to make a victim impact statement. I kept it brief. Your Honor, what Miss Patterson did to my property was not just illegal, it was a violation of trust. As HOA president, she was supposed to be a leader in our community, someone who brought people together and helped maintain our neighborhood. Instead, she used her position to bully and harass homeowners, including me. Her actions cost me time, money, and stress that I should never have had to deal with. I am glad she is being held accountable, and I hope this sends a message that HOA board members are not above the law. Thank you. The judge thanked me and then addressed Brenda directly. Miss Patterson, you abused your position of authority in your community. You allowed your personal feelings about a homeowner to cloud your judgment, and you took actions that were clearly illegal. You are fortunate that Mr. Webb was willing to accept a plea to a misdemeanor charge, because the evidence would have easily supported a felony conviction. I hope you use this experience to reflect on your behavior and to make better choices in the future. You are a convicted criminal now, and that is something you will carry with you for the rest of your life. Brenda nodded, tears streaming down her face. It was the first time I had seen her show any real emotion about what she had done. After the sentencing hearing, several of my neighbors approached me outside the courthouse. They thanked me for standing up to Brenda and for holding her accountable. A couple of them shared their own stories of harassment and intimidation they had experienced under her leadership. One woman told me that Brenda had threatened to fine her $500 a day until she repainted her house a different color, even though the color was within the approved palette. Another man said Brenda had tried to force him to remove a solar panel installation that had been properly permitted and approved by the city, claiming it was an eyesore. The new HOA board president, a retired accountant named Patricia Morgan, reached out to me personally to apologize for what had happened. She assured me that the board was implementing new policies and oversight procedures to prevent any future abuses of power. They were also providing HOA board training for all members on Arizona HOA law, fiduciary duties, and proper governance procedures. Life in the neighborhood slowly returned to normal over the following months. I stopped receiving harassment emails about petty violations. The HOA began focusing on actual community improvements, rather than nitpicking homeowners. Several of Brenda's allies on the board resigned or chose not to run for re-election, and new members were voted in who seemed genuinely interested in serving the community rather than wielding power over their neighbors. My sprinkler system continued to work perfectly, and my lawn looked great. I had installed a few additional security cameras around my property after the incident, including one with a clear view of the sprinkler controls, just in case. But there were no further problems. About 8 months after the criminal sentencing, I ran into Brenda Patterson at a grocery store in Gilbert. It was awkward. She was in the produce section, and I came around the corner with my cart and almost ran into her. We both froze for a moment. Marcus, she said quietly. Brenda. There was a long, uncomfortable silence. She looked older than I remembered, more tired. The confident, aggressive demeanor was gone, replaced by something that looked like defeat. I owe you an apology, she finally said. I have been going to counseling like the judge ordered, and I have been doing a lot of thinking about what I did. I was wrong. I let my ego and my need for control take over, and I hurt you and a lot of other people in the process. I am sorry. I did not know what to say. Part of me wanted to tell her that her apology was too little, too late. Part of me wanted to unload all the stress and frustration I had felt because of her actions. But looking at her standing there in the grocery store, looking diminished and genuinely remorseful, I realized that she had already paid a heavy price for what she had done. "I appreciate you saying that," I said carefully. "What you did really messed up my life for a while, but I am glad you are getting help and trying to do better." She nodded, tears forming in her eyes. "I moved out of Saguaro Heights. I could not face everyone after what happened. I am living in Mesa now, trying to start over. I just want you to know that I really am sorry." "Okay, I hope things work out for you, Brenda." She wiped her eyes and pushed her cart past me without another word. I stood there for a moment, processing the encounter, and then continued my shopping. That was the last time I ever saw or heard from Brenda Patterson. Looking back on the whole experience, I learned several important lessons. First, document everything. If I had not had Tom's doorbell camera footage, the entire case would have been much harder to prove. Second, know your rights. I spent time researching Arizona HOA law and understanding what HOAs can and cannot legally do, which gave me the confidence to fight back when Brenda overstepped. Third, do not be afraid to stand up to bullies, even when they have a title or position of authority. Brenda was counting on me being intimidated and backing down, and when I did not, her entire house of cards collapsed. The experience also taught me the value of good neighbors. Tom Hendricks providing the video footage was crucial, and the support I received from other homeowners who had also been victimized by Brenda's behavior made the whole process easier. Community matters, and standing together against abuse of power is important. The financial recovery was also significant. I got back every penny I spent on repairs and court costs, and Brenda faced real consequences for her actions, both civil and criminal. Too often, HOA board members abuse their power with no accountability. In this case, the system worked the way it was supposed to. My experience also sparked some positive changes in the Saguaro Heights community. The new board implemented policies requiring multiple board members to approve any enforcement actions, mandatory training for all board members on Arizona HOA law, and a transparent appeals process for homeowners who receive violation notices. They also established a homeowners committee to provide input on major decisions and to serve as a check on board power. Property values in the neighborhood actually increased after Brenda's departure, which I found ironic. She had always claimed that her strict enforcement of rules was necessary to protect property values, but it turned out that her reign of terror was actually hurting the community. Once the new board took over and people felt safe in their own homes again, the neighborhood became a more desirable place to live. I also became somewhat of a local expert on HOA issues. Several neighbors asked me for advice when they received violation notices or had disputes with the HOA. I was happy to share what I had learned and to help people understand their rights. In one case, I helped a neighbor fight a bogus fine for having the wrong shade of beige paint on their house, and we won when we showed that the color was actually on the approved list, and the HOA had made an error. Steve Chen, my lawyer friend, told me that my case became something of a teaching example in HOA law circles. Apparently, he used it in a continuing legal education seminar he taught about HOA governance and liability. The combination of clear video evidence, proper documentation, and the willingness to pursue both civil and criminal remedies made it a textbook example of how to handle HOA abuse. The story also got shared widely on social media and HOA watchdog websites. I received emails from people all over the country who had similar experiences with their HOAs and were looking for advice. While I could not provide legal advice, I always encouraged people to document everything, know their state and local laws, and not be afraid to stand up for their rights. I also recommended that people get involved in their HOA boards and governance to prevent people like Brenda from taking over in the first place. One unexpected outcome was that the story attracted the attention of some Arizona state legislators who were interested in HOA reform. I was invited to testify before a legislative committee that was considering new laws to increase oversight of HOA boards and to provide better protections for homeowners. I shared my story and made recommendations based on my experience. Some of those recommendations were ultimately incorporated into legislation that passed the following year, including requirements for HOA board training, limits on the types of fines that can be imposed without a hearing, and stronger penalties for board members who abuse their authority. That legislative work was actually really fulfilling. Knowing that my bad experience could lead to positive changes that would protect other homeowners made the whole ordeal feel more worthwhile. I was not going to let Brenda Patterson's abuse of power be for nothing. In terms of my personal life, the experience made me more cautious about where I choose to live. If I ever move again, I will be very careful about researching the HOA before buying a property. I will read the governing documents carefully, attend board meetings before purchasing, talk to current homeowners about their experiences, and look for red flags like overly restrictive rules, high turnover on the board, or evidence of constant conflict. Not all HOAs are bad, but it is important to know what you are getting into before you sign on the dotted line. The whole situation also strengthened my friendships with several neighbors. Tom Hendricks and I became much closer after he provided the video evidence that won my case. We started having regular barbecues and game nights, and our families became good friends. Several other neighbors who had been victims of Brenda's harassment also reached out, and we formed a sort of informal support group. It is funny how shared adversity can bring people together. As for my irrigation system, it continued to work perfectly for years after the repair. Every time I watched the sprinklers come on in the early morning, watering my lawn efficiently and keeping my landscaping green despite the Arizona heat, I thought about the battle I had fought to protect my property rights. That sprinkler system represented more than just a way to water my grass. It represented my refusal to be bullied, my willingness to stand up for myself, and my commitment to holding people accountable when they abuse their power. I never had another problem with the HOA after Brenda's departure. The new board was professional, reasonable, and actually focused on improving the community rather than harassing homeowners. They repaved the roads, updated the community pool, organized neighborhood events, and generally made Saguaro Heights a better place to live. It was amazing what a difference competent, ethical leadership could make. Several years after the incident, I was elected to the HOA board myself. I had never planned on getting involved in HOA governance, but after everything I had been through, I felt a responsibility to make sure that what happened to me never happened to anyone else in our community. I served a 3-year term and helped implement even more reforms and protections for homeowners. It was actually enjoyable to be part of an HOA board that functioned properly and served the community's interests. During my time on the board, I made sure we had clear policies for everything, from how violations were identified and noticed to how enforcement actions were taken. We created a system where no single board member could take unilateral action, and we made sure homeowners always had a fair hearing before any fines or penalties were imposed. We also worked to make the board more transparent and accessible, publishing meeting minutes online, creating a newsletter to keep homeowners informed, and holding regular open forums where residents could ask questions and raise concerns. One of my proudest achievements during my time on the board was creating a dispute resolution process that encouraged communication and compromise, rather than conflict and punishment. We trained board members in mediation techniques and made it clear that our goal was to help neighbors work out their differences, not to be the neighborhood police. It was a fundamental shift in philosophy from the Brenda Patterson era, and it made a huge difference in the community's atmosphere. I also worked to educate homeowners about their rights and responsibilities. We created a welcome packet for new residents that included not just the rules and regulations but also information about how the HOA worked, how decisions were made, how to get involved, and what to do if they had a complaint or concern. We wanted people to feel empowered rather than intimidated by the HOA. The experience with Brenda Patterson also made me more aware of the psychology of power and how easily people can abuse authority if there are not proper checks and balances in place. I read books about leadership, organizational psychology, and governance. I learned about concepts like petty tyranny and power corruption that helped me understand how someone like Brenda could convince herself that destroying my property was justified. I also became an advocate for term limits on HOA boards. I believed that no one should serve as HOA president for more than 2 or 3 consecutive terms, because the risk of developing a sense of entitlement or losing touch with the community was too high. Brenda had been president for 5 years when she destroyed my sprinkler system, and I think that long tenure contributed to her belief that she could do whatever she wanted without consequences. In the years since the incident, I have shared my story with countless people, both in person and online. I have been interviewed for podcasts about HOA issues, written guest articles for real estate and legal blogs, and spoken at community events about homeowner rights. My goal has always been to help other people avoid what I went through and to empower homeowners to stand up against HOA abuse. The financial impact of the case was ultimately neutral for me. I recovered all my costs through the civil judgment, and while I spent time and energy fighting the case, I considered it time well spent. The principle was worth fighting for, and the positive changes that resulted from my case benefited not just me, but the entire community. I often wonder what would have happened if I had not had the video evidence. Would I have been able to prove my case? Would Brenda have gotten away with it? Would I have just given up and paid for the repairs myself rather than fighting? I do not know, but I am grateful that Tom's doorbell camera captured everything and that I had the resources and determination to pursue justice. The incident also affected how I think about property rights and the rule of law more broadly. We live in a society where we are supposed to be protected from arbitrary actions by people in authority. We have due process, we have the right to a hearing, we have the right to appeal decisions we think are wrong. What Brenda did violated all of those principles. She decided unilaterally that I was in violation. She appointed herself judge and jury, and she carried out the punishment without giving me any chance to defend myself. That is not how a civilized society is supposed to work, and I was not willing to accept it. I think that is the key lesson from my experience. Do not accept abuse of power, no matter where it comes from. Whether it is an HOA board president, a government official, a boss at work, or anyone else in a position of authority, people need to be held accountable when they overstep their bounds. It is not always easy to fight back, and it is not always convenient, but it is necessary if we want to live in a society where rights matter and rules apply to everyone. Looking back now, years later, I can honestly say that while the experience was stressful and frustrating at the time, I am glad it happened. Not because I enjoyed being victimized or fighting a legal battle, but because it taught me so much about standing up for myself, about how the legal system works, about the importance of documentation and evidence, and about the power of community. I became a better, stronger person because of what I went through, and I was able to help make positive changes that benefited many other people. My sprinkler system still works perfectly to this day, and every time I see it running, I smile and remember the battle I fought and won. That irrigation system cost me $1,340 to repair, but it taught me lessons that were worth far more than that. And Brenda Patterson learned that being an HOA president does not put you above the law. She paid for her actions with a criminal conviction, a $1,000 fine, a year of probation, 100 hours of community service, mandatory counseling, and the permanent stain on her reputation. Justice was served, and I slept better at night knowing that she had been held accountable for what she did. In the end, the story of my destroyed sprinkler system became a story about justice, accountability, and the importance of standing up for your rights. It became a story that helped other people in similar situations. And it became a story that showed that even when you are up against someone in a position of power, with video evidence, determination, and the truth on your side, you can win. That is a message I hope resonates with anyone who reads this and finds themselves facing similar challenges with their HOA or any other authority figure who thinks they are above the law. You have rights, you have recourse, and you should never be afraid to fight for what is rightfully yours.